Welcome everyone, or welcome back to the Charleston Forum's virtual programming. We're glad to have you join us for our education panel today. And first off, let me thank our sponsors who are the people and companies who keep us able to bring you these panels and to continue the conversations and bringing proposals to the community going forward. One of our most recent ones are the excellent lawyers over at the Rosen Haygood Law Firm. Thank you to Rosen Haygood. Now, as you may know, we are basing our discussions on these panels on the results of the Tri-County survey we did on issues of race in the 4 areas that the forum focuses on, which includes policing, criminal justice, education, economics, and the future of the past. And we have really, all of those issues, the elemental part of everything comes back to education. And we have so many people on our board of the forum who really focus on the education piece of this and worked hard to bring this panel to you together today. And I'd like to thank our education task force who include Lynn Pagliaro, Tom Grubasich, Harold Wack, and Rick Quinn. And also like to thank Rick Quinn, who was instrumental in developing the survey in the first instance, that really brought us the information that we are here to talk about and develop proposals to address the areas, particularly in education, that our citizens agree that we're not getting things done the way we want to. So let's talk about the different ideas of how we can do that. And you in the audience, please share this widely. The video will be available tomorrow morning on Facebook, and the more audience participation we can get, the more attention we can get, the more attention we can demand with the proposals that we're able to generate here. So please do that. Please share it on social media, and be sure all of your network participates as well. So I'm excited to have John Reed back, who joined us a few years ago, and have him lead our discussion on the education panel here. And we couldn't have anyone more expert to do it. And I'm sure all of you watching know our lineup here includes Rhett Mabry from the Duke Endowment, Darrin Goss here from the Coastal Community Foundation, and Carol Tempel, who has done so much work in our community over the years, and Elliot Smalley, who we're glad to have back as well, former superintendent of the South Carolina's Charter School District. And as we go forward, I want you in the audience, please ask questions. If you're able to do it today, use the chat feature down at the bottom, and John will do his best to fit questions in with the panel. And afterwards, please email us at info@thecharlestonforum.com, and we will pursue what ideas you have and how we can get you better involved. So thank you again for being here. John, thanks so much for leading the discussion. Over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks to the forum for making this opportunity available to discuss the important issues of education in our region. I should note that Reverend Kylon Middleton was to be with us, and we're not quite sure where he is, but we hope he is able to join. But in any event, we are going to proceed with the panel that we have. My purpose is first to acquaint you with the agenda, how we've broken it out, the order of things, but also to establish some framework for this discussion, because education and equity get discussed a lot in our community, but not always in a productive way. So we have worked with the panel to identify some scaffolding and some foundation for this discussion, which I'll share with you in a minute. We're here to discuss with an equity lens the state of public education in our region, and to do so not about any one district, but all 4 and all 3 counties, and to consider from the different perspectives on this panel the work of reforming what we have. One purpose surely is to assist the voters in this election season to choose among the some 40-odd candidates for the 4 school boards across the region, for those who haven't already voted. We hope that that is a thoughtful and deliberate process along with the other elections that we have, and we want to assist in it. This is not a discussion about COVID, except to the extent that COVID has exacerbated the issues that we are here to talk about. But it's important to note that educators in our region, from teachers to superintendents and board members, are doing extraordinary work to deliver education, teaching, and learning as best they can under very difficult circumstances, and with multiple crises underway. And that in terms of the systems failure that we're here to discuss, they are as much the victims of these issues as the kids in our schools. So the framework that we've established for the discussion has 4 fundamental points to it that I want to review now, and then proceed to the questioning. From there, the panelists will do all the talking. First, I think we observe that there is widespread agreement on the ends. Certainly, the Charleston Forum survey demonstrates that. We all want the same thing. We want every child to be successful in school. There are, however, significant differences on the means to that end, and it's those differences that are on the table today. Second, we will discuss how resources, that is talent and dollars, get to the classroom. And in this context, we wish to be clear, at least for this discussion, what the words equity and equality mean. Equality is used to express what we all want in the way of opportunity for our children in schools. Equity, however, means an inherently unequal distribution of talent and dollars so that they go to where the need is greatest. And that distinction sometimes gets lost when we use those terms too synonymously, if you will. Third, just like the survey, this is a discussion about systems, public education systems, as they have evolved in 3 counties and 4 school districts. And it is above the politics and personalities and electioneering in any one county. We will not today be discussing any one county, and we don't need to. The problems that we're talking about, the disparity that separates Black and brown kids from white kids, poor kids from rich kids in our schools, exist in every school, all 180 public schools in the region, and I dare say many, many, many schools across the country. It is not necessary to get to the level of seeking out blame to place on individuals. Rather, we can discuss what systems failure is all about. And systems failure is no one's fault, but it's everyone's responsibility. And the children who we're talking about are not their children, but our children. Pastor Middleton, welcome. We're glad you're here. We're just getting started. The panelists agree, as I suspect all of us do, that the economic future of this region and the well-being of its citizenry rests on finding a solution to these problems. Say what you will about these multiple crises that we confront. Our school systems are now in crisis as a result. And if disruptive change is in order, disruption is already underway, and it represents an opportunity to make the reforms that need to be made. The panelists come from different life experiences. They have different points of view. They have in common a commitment to public education and an understanding of how systems work. Each has had the opportunity to review in detail the results of the Charleston Forum survey, the Avery study, the Clemson study, the Harvard study, the Tri-County Cradle to Rear reports that show the numbers of this related to disparity. And you have met them all except for Kylon Middleton, who just joined us. He is the pastor for Mount Zion, AME Church and a former educator with extensive experience both in school and with this range of issues. Welcome, Kylon. We will get to the subject in 3 topic areas. The first is equity, dollars, and talent from pre-kindergarten, or 3K, if you will, to 12th grade. Second, equity and district governance. And third, innovative schools, 3K to K-12. What works and what's next? I will be posing questions to each of the panelists, and we will address the survey responses as we go. So let's begin. This first topic, equity, dollars, and talent. Reform issues are a question of how much, but also how dollars and talent are distributed. And equity demands that these resources go to where the need is greatest, sufficient to meet those needs. The purpose of getting this right is to provide every school, and certainly our most challenging schools, a highly qualified instructional leader as principal, leading experienced and culturally competent teachers setting high expectations for kids. Those 3 elements inform every excellent school across the country that we have. Now, in this context, cost per pupil is a complicated number. Funds arrive at the schoolhouse door, not in big buckets, but in scores, maybe hundreds of little rivulets that have restricted purposes to them. Calculating per student costs in this way makes it complicated. And if you have a building with half as many students in it as should be, the costs are very different from a building with 4,000 students that's at capacity. Those are the complicating factors for costs. The same holds true for educators. One teacher is not another teacher. Talent is not a teacher. It distinguishes itself by experience and skill and cultural competence. Darrin, the debate often focuses on whether funding is too much or not enough. More than 50% of those in the survey, both white and Black, are willing to see taxes increased for education, and they also believe that the same or fewer financial resources are provided to schools labeled failing. First, is this true? And is there a systemic issue in how funds make their way to the classroom and for accountability for results?
John, thank you. And let me thank Reverend Middleton, Rhett, Elliot, and Carol for being on this panel with me. It's a high privilege to be on sharing the stage with you guys. John, you laid out the difference between equality and equity, but I really, because of the work the Charleston Forum has done, and because we're all grown-ups, I want to add maybe a definition of racial equity that the Racial Equity Institute puts out there that I've been really absorbing over the last several months, and that is that in a truly racially equitable society, in this case we're talking about education in schools, then the distribution of the educational system's benefits and burdens are not skewed by race, if we reach real racial equity. And saying it a different way, it suggests that a person is no more, in this case a student, is no more or less likely to experience the educational system's benefits or burdens just because of the color of their skin. And so it's in that context that when we talk about funding and we talk about funding formulas, you have to go back to South Carolina 2006 and Act 388 that substantially changed the funding formula from homeowner occupied residential property taxes that literally underwrote local school districts and programs to shifting that burden to sales tax. We increased sales tax by a penny, and then commercial and rental properties. And so at the structural level, since we're talking about systems, I think there's a structural and fundamental flaw with the way school systems are funded. And that's a big structural issue that if we're talking about solutions, we need to look at that. I know the Charleston Chamber has looked at it. Cradle to Careers looked at it, but I think as an item, we should lift that up as a policy item to be considered. The second thing I'll say goes to perception being reality. If you are in a situation where your students attend a school where funding for that school is based on the number of students who attend that school, and teachers, extracurricular activities, programs are based on that funding formula, then you're gonna be at a significant deficit in terms of what's available for those particular students. So that is the reality, and that is a structural problem. The last thing I'll say in my last 30 seconds is that the way we label our schools, you get to this point about failing schools. If the student, and I hate that we do this to students, is the commodity that people are trying to attract and market to, and you say that that school is a failing school or a neighborhood school or community school, and then you have these other systems of schools of choice or choice schools, automatically a parent and students will say, I want to go to that school, regardless of the history, heritage, or the strength of the teachers that may be in the school that is labeled failing. So I think there's some structural issues that we have to deal with. I hope we can get into that a little bit more, but at the systems level, I would point to Act 388 as a policy, and then how we label schooling, because there's just not enough resources there to do those things well. So
Great, thank you. Rhett, 2 minutes, please. The Duke Endowment has done extensive work on its own and with partners in North Carolina, intended to see that every child succeeds. What are you learning about how talent and dollars are distributed now in school districts like ours, and whether changes are required?
Well, thank you, John. I too appreciate the opportunity to be here and to join these other distinguished panelists on this panel. So thank you for the opportunity. Let me take just a second. I know I've got 2 minutes, but let me take a second to give you a quick summary of what we're trying to do in Guilford County, North Carolina, the project that you referenced in your question. It's essentially a prenatal to third grade comprehensive effort at the county level to measurably improve outcomes across several domains. So we're looking to for planned and well-timed pregnancies, improved birth outcomes, promoting appropriate social and emotional development in the early years of life, increasing kindergarten readiness, and having students perform at grade level in math and reading by third grade. So the basic strategy to achieve those outcomes is to proactively connect with all new mothers in the county and their families. So every mother, regardless of income, race, we're trying to reach out and connect with each. And we're trying to connect with them at various intervals, prenatally while pregnant, at birth at 12, 24, 36 months, at kindergarten entry at grades 1, 2, and 3. And what we're trying to do when we connect with these families is we're trying to assess them to identify their needs, and then hopefully provide high quality services that may be embedded in the county or may need to be developed in the county to meet those needs. Essentially, what we're describing here is we're trying to create a system in early childhood before the K-12 years, where I believe, frankly, there is no system. And that requires a data system that we're creating to undergird the effort. We're using a Salesforce platform to link the families and services and to track the data. And again, our goal in this county of Guilford, which has 6,000 births a year, so it's an enormous effort that we're taking on, is to assess all these children at these intervals and respond equitably, meaning assess the need and then provide the appropriate level of services to meet that need based on the assessment. And we call it targeted universal assessment, where we basically universally assess all families, and then we target our intervention to help those who need the most support. And the philosophy behind this, frankly, is to make support to young families and their children a community norm. So in some ways, we're trying to destigmatize the need for help, because all families need help. And then once we assess these families, again, we're trying to navigate them to the appropriate service. One more thing I'll say, in terms of how money is distributed, we're not trying to take away from the school system. What we are trying to do is make the case for putting more money early childhood, prenatally until 3rd grade. And we're compelled by the research in this area by Jack Shonkoff at Harvard, who talks about how critical the early years are in brain development. Jim Hegman, University of Chicago, who talks about the economic return. And what we're trying to do is prove with a rigorous evaluation that we can get better outcomes for these children. And as a result of those outcomes, produce long-term savings for government. So we believe there's savings to be found if we can do our work more effectively. I want to say one more thing, if I may. I don't believe that we as a country live into our ideals of providing equal opportunity as you've described it, John. And obviously we have failed miserably throughout our history in that. I don't think we'll ever get there of providing equal opportunity unless we invest in our children early in life to prepare them for success in school. Because once a child gets behind early on, it is difficult to catch up. And if they don't catch up, what they're not going to have as they transition to adulthood is an equal opportunity in a hyper-competitive world. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rhett. Pastor, you have extensive experience as a student, teacher, administrator, both here and elsewhere. Whites and blacks who responded to the survey all agree that principals should be paid more. Why is it so difficult to get experienced instructional leaders trained and ready to lead our most challenging schools?
So thank you again, John, and to this all-star panel of professionals who are here today, Darrin, Carol, Elliot, Rhett. Good to be on this panel with all of you. In preparation even for that question, I stumbled across an article that I was reading. The pain outweighs the gain, why teachers don't want to become principals. And I resonate with that in a sense, because we are looking at schools across the United States, not just in Charleston, Berkeley, or Dorchester counties, that are facing a crisis of leadership because many school districts are finding it very difficult and increasingly hard to find and recruit individuals to become principals. There are many reasons and factors where educational professionals are opting not to even enter instructional leadership. And the most frequent identified by educators for not applying for principals is the lack of sufficient compensation, which you just said. Many people believe that it just doesn't pay enough. And in fact, when I was a principal, I can concur to that. The most common, or the second most common factor identified, was the overwhelming number of tasks involved with the principalship. There are too many demands and responsibilities to justify accepting a job as a school principal, even though the principal's primary task is to serve as the school's instructional leader. The multitude of managerial tasks often make it difficult, if not impossible. And certainly when individuals like teachers and others who are within a school context look at how demanding that principal, that job is, certainly you don't want to be working 50 hours plus per week and then recognizing that that individual would be extended or overextended during most evenings and weekends for activities. And the demands of the job in terms of stress and time make it more undesirable for individuals to want to become a principal. And then lastly, when looking at training and getting individuals at least interested in becoming an instructional leader in a building context, it's lonely. When you become the principal or the building level leader of a school, you have no friends, you're in a category all by yourself, and you almost become, sort of isolated just by virtue of your office. Teachers always have other teachers to commiserate with, other individuals within the building have individuals that they can at least draw strength from and become mentors, partners, and individuals to begin to lift one another up. The principal within that building is really by him or herself. So it becomes a very lonely, isolating position. And when individuals look at that, that also becomes a deterrent. When looking at providing the training and or readiness necessary to prepare them for this task, even looking at programs, developmental programs, school administration programs, when looking at the cost and the student loans that may be associated with that, that becomes another reason why people decide not to enter that profession.
Very helpful. The voice of experience. Carol, you're another member of the panel with extensive experience as a teacher in both great schools and challenging ones. More than 50% of whites and blacks responding to the survey believe teachers should be paid more. But how do we change a system that puts the least experienced teachers in the most challenging schools?
Great, thank you. I'm glad to be here too and have a chance to share and hear what everyone else has to say. My comments this afternoon are going to come from my experience, not only as a teacher, but I've also worked in the district as a central staff administrator. I've also been an administrator in a school. I have my degrees in science and educational leadership. So I'm trying to integrate as I thought about this forum from all of my experiences. I have been on a school board. I've been on a charter school board. I've presently serve on a school improvement council. So I've given this a lot of thought. I am a product of public schools. My children attended public schools and my grandchildren are currently in our schools. So my thinking on this question that you posed, John, begins again with this premise that equity and equality begin in the classroom. And in a state constitution, with the words providing a minimally adequate education, I don't think that that influences us having a system that addresses these values. So I really like to get rid of those words and insert the words equity and equality. I also want to acknowledge that our challenging schools do have experienced teachers who remain committed to educating children in their highest potentials, but they do need support. For systemic reform to address the goal of having experienced teachers in challenging schools, I believe in the community schools model as the research-based model to do that. And the reason I like it is because it's a very collaborative model that supports teachers and supports the principal as well. As I heard Kylon's comments, I thought about that. So yes, I say paying teachers more, lowering class size is also important, and letting teachers teach and worry less about testing would help tremendously. We know that teachers can't focus on the learning needs of their students if they have too many students, if they can't focus on teaching, and they're working 2 to 3 jobs to support themselves. So here's some solutions. The first one is I think that we should increase teachers' time in college so they enter the classroom fully licensed when they step into the classroom. And this includes the mastery of their content, the understanding of students from various backgrounds and economic levels, and have experience working with a variety of students. I know from my own experience, having worked in Los Angeles and with dropout students and students, in various communities, that is an incredible, it is incredibly important to understanding the students. The teachers also need to, develop their skills in designing lessons and so forth. So I believe that there needs to be scholarships and paid internships to offset the cost of the increased time in college. I think second thing is we need to build a supportive system at the school level. It needs to be a place where experienced educators work closely with novices to mentor and coach them. That means teachers work collaboratively with each other to plan lessons, to reflect on student work, adjust the curriculum, and work with their principal and parents to meet the actual needs of the students. We also need to provide teachers with the resources they need in their classrooms. We shouldn't expect them to spend their grocery money on things that are needed in the classroom. In these challenging schools, the teachers there are working with challenging families and student situations. So mental health is important not only for the students, but it's also important for the teachers. And I believe in these challenging schools that we've had too much turnover. We need to stabilize leadership and the teachers in the schools. Neighborhood schools work best where there's teamwork, where the staff knows the children and the families know the staff, and you build relationships with families and their communities. And finally, at the district level, I think one solution is to really focus intently on having a central staff with curriculum, instruction, and professional development expertise to support teachers and the principals and the other administrators in the schools, so they have the resources and programs for best teaching and learning experiences for students. And I think we also, in these challenging schools, we need to work to hire and train a diverse staff. And that's a tough one, but it will happen if we support our schools to start with. I mean, that's where it starts. If we don't educate educate a diverse population to start with, we're not going to get the teaching force that we need ultimately in our schools.
Okay. Elliot, your question. You have deep experience here and in Tennessee with funding systems, supporting all types of public schools, including schools established by district or state charter. How is inequity to be addressed through these different mechanisms? And may I add too that these are finite amounts of dollars and talent. So adding more money to the pot may not be the final solution to that range of questions.
Sure. Yeah, and again, I just want to echo the thanks of my fellow panelists. And here we are in this virtual panel, and think about what it's like for the teachers all across Charleston County and the Tri-County area right now. They're doing this every day. So, shout out to the teachers. Two of my kids, one goes to C.E. Williams, our neighborhood middle school. One goes to St. Andrews Elementary, our neighborhood elementary school. And it amazes me what they do every day. And so if any of you are teachers out there working with teachers, just want to take a second to thank you, because this is just, your work is even more difficult. And I'm so appreciative for the job that you're doing with our youth, with our children. So thank you for that. Yeah, John, I mean, you touch on this in opening the forum and in opening this question that we're in a crisis. And I always kind of want to root the urgency and the answer in recognizing that, particularly for students of color. I mean, we know from the survey results how people are feeling about that. I noticed in that survey, African-American respondents were 3 times as likely to say that the system is completely broken than they were to say that the system is working. And we can see that in the outcomes. One thing I was, before this, looking at the 2019 data, that 4% of African-American English 1 end of course exam takers got an A here locally, compared to 40% of white test takers. That's a 10 times difference in those outcomes. In 3rd grade, Rhett, you're talking about 3rd grade readiness, 3rd grade fluency, so critical to build on a foundation for young people that then they can read to build knowledge and discover what, books and stories tell them about the world. If you don't have that, it's so much harder to get it if you don't have it by 3rd grade. 24% of African-American students read on grade level in 2019 compared to 76% white 3rd graders. And we know that that is not indicative of the student and the student's potential, right? Because all the students have potential to read with excellence and read on grade level. So it is a system issue, and it is all of our responsibility to do something about that very urgently. And it is clearly defined by race, which is not on the student, but on the system and the adults around them. So what do we do about that? How does funding play a role? I think the thing I would add about funding here that I think is so important that we frankly lose sight of, and I think it's right there at our fingertips, and that is looking at, frankly, what works. I mean, there's a lot happening right now around reform that's tied to primary grade reading instruction. and really looking at research-based reading practices in the early grades and the programs that really root teachers in teaching reading. It's pretty shameful, if you go out and you meet with teachers and work with teachers, a lot of teachers aren't properly trained, especially once they get into middle and high school, on how to teach reading. You can be an English 1 teacher and you might be talking about main idea, but you may actually have students who need still some foundations work in reading. And if they don't get it, they're going to be in peril. And so I would say, to what extent are we taking the millions of dollars that we have that, as you said, go in rivulets down to the schools? What if we made sure that they did go in buckets to the schools directly, and that those buckets were really focused on the programs that we know work, the most talented teachers in front of our highest need scholars, the best reading programs possible that we are going to implement with full integrity, give the teachers the training that they need to do that. I think that alone, if we really dug in on that, would make a huge difference. The final thing I'd say is there's really no magic bullet around governance. Charter, district, school, I've worked with both. I was a Charleston County administrator for years. I think the key is, how can we take the dollars that we have and give power to school leaders and teachers to be part of the decision-making process? They know their scholars the best. I think that is one thing that charters do pretty well. And I think districts can do it just as well. So processes in your budgets that make sure that people who are closest to the scholars have power in how they use their dollars and how they help influence the decisions, including families and parents, the likes of which filled out this survey. What role do they have in how dollars are used for their scholars? So those are the points that I would add.
Great, very helpful. So at this point, more dollars, but also freeing up, but presumably with some accountability, that the dollars that we have, so that the principal, the superintendent, has the authority and the capability to address the needs that are most significant in that school. That's the size of it. I'm going to move us along, but we have 2 questions from the viewers. One I can answer. The question is, how do principals get assigned to schools? And the answer is that the superintendent or his or her designate has the authority to place anybody in a school and to make a change where necessary. The second question, Rhett, goes to you, whether Head Start and early Head Start figure prominently in the universal targeted approach that you're sponsoring.
Thank you, John. It's a good question. Historically, I would have said no right off the bat because Head Start enjoys federal funding and we would not want to augment that. However, as we're doing more and more place-based investing, where we're taking on whole communities and whole counties, we're trying to work with all the providers that provide high quality services there. And that has made us much more amenable or open to, receptive to funding Head Start in those particular communities that we're trying to prove that an effective early childhood strategy would work.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try to catch us up. We're running a little behind, so we'll move to the second topic now. And that topic is equity and governance, and specifically addressed to what we as an electorate should look for in the attributes of school board members that we're about to elect. Particularly with systems change and necessity in all 4 districts, as it appears to be. Kylon, why is it so difficult to mobilize grassroots voters behind board candidates capable of changing the system we have in order to make the system more equitable?
Thank you again. And first, let me say God bless you to all individuals who offer themselves up for office.
True that.
To include school board, because I do recognize that it is certainly an arduous task just to run for office. And when you are not one of those candidates that's pretty much bundled and supported by a PAC, then it is very difficult to mobilize grassroots support. First of all, the school board sets the policies. They set the overarching framework for the district under which it operates. The superintendent, runs the district and carries out that through his or her function as the chief instructional leader and or the chief executive officer for that district. but it is so important to have the right individuals to just step up to the plate and offer themselves for to serve in these positions, to include school board. And when we look at people who come from diverse backgrounds, you don't necessarily have to come from education itself, as your area of expertise. You can come from business, you can come from the world, but you bring a perspective, because schools and school districts are shared values of the entire community. And so when we look at down ballot races like school board races, it just loses the luster of the community, because people just are not as interested. It's not as sexy a position as president of the United States or as a senatorial candidate. But we need individuals as mobilized and as synergized and ignited in their interest in getting the right candidates and the right individuals elected to school board to help set those policies, those equitable policies that will spin our school districts in this area into areas of innovation, into areas of transformation, and into areas where we are excelling. South Carolina has been on the bottom. I'm a product of Charleston County Schools and of South Carolina, and I don't consider myself to be on the bottom. But when looking at the tie for last place, we have always been competing at the bottom rung of the educational spectrum. So we need the community to become interested in individuals serving on the school board and in education. So it is difficult, because people, when they graduate from school, they never want to come back to school, and they find themselves confronted with school systems when they have children, and that almost becomes another bad experience in some cases for parents who hyperventilated coming out of the school system themselves. We need to get the right candidates in. We need to support them financially through donating individually. I'm a candidate for Charleston County Council, not advertising that, but I'm just saying, as a grassroots sort of initiative, we had over 400 or 500 voters, 400 or 500, donors to contribute. So that is the sort of mobilization that propels these candidates, not big PACs giving hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to promote their candidates. We need the community to become interested, to become synergized behind candidates, to support them monetarily, and to literally deliver them to victory, so that they can then become those change agents serving in the school board.
Great, thank you. Elliot, you have extensive experience with school boards, both local and state. What are the attributes of a board candidate that qualify her or him to deal with the complex issues school districts confront? And what would you say to the 40-odd board candidates in this region should be their response to the fact that fewer than half of Blacks who responded to the survey believe their children have an equal opportunity to succeed?
Yeah, I would say to them that they should say, you're absolutely right. They don't have an equal opportunity to succeed. It's very clear. I would say you're absolutely right. And I want to talk to you more. I want you to be a part of the change that we need to see. It shouldn't just happen in a district office or in a boardroom. It should happen with families. That's what I would say to those parents or to those board members if they were asking, how do I respond to that? Because that's just the truth. That's not just respondents' truth. It's the truth borne out in outcomes that we see all across the Tri-County area. And it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, we know that all students can learn at the same high level, so we know it doesn't have to be that way. And I would say when looking at, board candidates, and I just got my early voting done this morning, and, big shout out to all the poll workers. It, ran very quickly. So get on in there if you haven't already, or get in there on election day and exercise your civil right. But I would say, look, one, you should be a person who's willing to confront and be vocal about racial injustice and talk about race very openly and take it on. Especially, I would say, if you're, a person of privilege and power, a white person in our community who's got a platform and can use your voice to make a difference. I think that's very important. I think that second, managing a district is a complex task. Managing a superintendent and a budget is a very complex task. And I do think it's fair to ask board members about experience, why this matters to them, their purpose in doing it. And, look and see what is their experience with public education? What is their experience with complex budgets? Because I think that those skills matter on boards. And then I think the final thing is, someone who really deeply is about our community and the outcomes that we want to see for our scholars. And if possible, someone who we know, and I think you can test this by looking at a person's background and in interviews, but, when boards become super political and personalized, that's when things go off the rails. And, we've all seen it. We've seen it here in Charleston happen. And those are some long board meetings focused on the things that don't matter the most. And I'm not putting that on the current board or any particular board, but over the years, we've seen that where it just gets really personal and political. And we wind up talking about things that have nothing to do, as Carol says, with the heart of what's happening in classrooms. And so, really looking for people who care about what happens with teaching and learning, and who are really willing to put shoulder to wheel and do whatever it takes to make sure that we're going to change things. I think a final note is if you're okay with the status quo and the way things are, I don't think you're gonna serve the purposes of this district and this area, the Tri-County area, well. I think people should come up fired up to make things better, and really open to ideas that can change things, because we desperately need change.
Thanks. Carol, Kylon raised the subject of the cost of running for the school board, and you have been outspoken on the subject of school board election financing and the need for greater transparency. How do those interested in reforming the system support qualified candidates, if not through donations?
Great. That's a big question here that you gave to me, John. Yes, I have been outspoken about the dark money, and especially in the CCSD school board elections. In 2018, the Coalition for Kids spent over $750,000, and it looks like a lot of money is being spent in 2020. So here's where I come from. I am an educator, and I support grassroots support of our schools. I believe school board members should be selected on merit. And one of the things that we're seeing is there have been a lot of grassroots efforts at questionnaires. In fact, I plan to pull together a list of items, and I will do that tomorrow and share it through the forum and any other way I can, because there have been an inordinate number of forums that have been held, even some sponsored by students, questionnaires that have been given to the candidates, so voters can decide for themselves who is going to best serve the children in our economy, or in our community rather. So you asked, like, if you don't do it through donations, what else can you do? So here are my thoughts. If I was a donor interested in reforming the system, and I am interested, I would give directly to the candidates I believe will focus on supporting students at the school and district level. There are candidates who know best educational practices. They value equality and equity in education. They're knowledgeable about our schools and community because they visit and are part of the schools. And they're committed to strong neighborhood public education schools, and they understand and support a community school model for operating schools. Let me just say it maybe another way. In my church, we learned about a serious need for children at Mitchell Elementary to have experiences outside of the school. So what did we do? We raised funds via a coffee house, and we gave the funds we raised directly to the school so that teachers can provide their students with out-of-school experiences and field trips, especially in the area of science and social studies. We often help chaperone, and we receive a report of the activities as well as notes from the students about what they've learned. So this example shows that, I believe giving the money directly is important. Another community organization has a different model. The Charleston Area Justice Ministry observed the need for over 400 more children needing early childhood education. And they also looked at the discipline data that showed a very high rate of suspensions and expulsions. So what did they do? They researched best practices and community resources for solutions. Then they advocated and worked with the district to increase the availability of early childhood opportunities, and they're currently working with the district to promote PBIS and restorative practices as a way to address the discipline in schools with equality and equity. The group monitors implementation and offers encouragement and community support. All of these innovations are operating within the district. Again, donors can directly support these community efforts in our schools and the district, as well as school board candidates.
Next question, Darrin, is for you. While one of the districts in this region is embroiled in conflict and debate as to how best to proceed with reform, the other three, where much of the region's growth is occurring and new schools are being built, seem to be largely silent on the subject of equity and reform. Is that the case? And if so, why?
Yeah, John, thank you for that question. And I know this is a prepared question for me, but I want to just sort of address the issue of donors and giving and to school board elections or to school programs. And that, I have the privilege of leading the largest foundation in the state of South Carolina and the one that makes the most grants in the state of South Carolina that's originally from here. And I get the privilege of working with donors across the spectrum, from young philanthropists to people who are advanced and have ultra wealth, who see, like I think, Carol, you suggested your church group, see the need, understand that they have resources and are willing to meet the needs and are willing to write or underwrite programs, services, and do that in a way that fundamentally supports children. The fact is, I think when you start thinking about school board races and everything else, and I think we've said it, so much of what happens in the classroom, it gets the politics get in that. And so as good as we need principals as leaders in school buildings, we need school boards who are willing to challenge the status quo, review their own practices and policies, make investments differently. And I think you can't underscore enough the need for progressive thinking when it comes to how we handle the structural and intentional racism that still exists in the Charleston County School District. And John, to the point that you made about the other two, I think that day of reckoning is coming with the migration pattern of people who are moving out of Charleston County into Dorchester and Berkeley County, where the demands and needs of working with and providing educational solutions for students who have not started in the ways that Rhett talked about. That day will come, but I think we are hard pressed to have a conversation about racial equity and not deal with the structural, historic, and systemic issues that have been intentionally put in place in Charleston County as a model for different places in the state. And so, again, I think there's, for me as the leader of a philanthropic organization, you got to have the program funding, you have to have the evaluation, but then you also have to couple that with policy and policymakers, the elected officials, who are willing to look at a system that's broken and said, look, we've got to be better. We can't, I saw a question and answer in the chat, how much money, more money, how much? I don't know what that takes. I think we have to do a better job of being stewards over the dollars we do have, focusing those investments, questioning our practices, and then changing and implementing new policies that get us to where we need to be. So I don't want to villainize donors who inherently want to do the right thing. That's what philanthropy is all about. I would say because of my own experience with St. John's High School and a principal embroiled in trying to improve the situation over there, working with donors who had, frankly, no history in Charleston, but was willing to commit resources to help that principal be very successful, and those students who they would never know be very successful, I think we have to be careful that we don't disincentivize people who have wealth to support the students in the systems that fundamentally need to be changed. I would always say, look at the results. If we evaluate results against the ideal of what we want, then I think we can have a different conversation. So sorry I didn't answer that question directly, but I did want to respond to some of what I heard.
Let's do a couple of follow-ups here. I'm looking at the Q&A section, and I note that one viewer reminds us that it's not just Act 388, but the legislature's failure to update the allocation formula. One might say that's just one of more than one failures at the feet of the General Assembly when it comes to this. But Darrin, I heard you say that we need more money, but we also need to do more with what we have. Does that mean that, does equity require that if there's a finite amount of resources, that some students will get less while others get more?
John, I think that's already happening. We have a finite amount of resources in the allocation tables, and how, to Carol's point, those allocations are being done. And so my point is, and I think the question may have been more rhetorical, is with the resources we do have under the current context in which we're operating, I think we have to do a better job of allocating those resources within the school districts and where the resources are most needed. And so it quite frankly could mean that you do some things with funding, but you also do some things with school zoning, that you do some things with the size of schools, that you, so I think that's a far more complex question than, maybe the 2 or 3 minutes we have to really dive into it. But I don't think just throwing more money at a problem without also looking at the policy that goes along with and that undergirds the current system and revising that, as well as what we do in terms of practice. I think you have to look at all of them. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay, good. Carol.
Yeah, I did some research on the school funding because it's an issue that really bothers me. And of course, when I was running for the House, I was asked a lot about school funding. So Act 388 is definitely a concern. And one of the things, my passion is math and science education. And since Act 388, we've looked at a decline in achievement in math and science. The graph is there, but be that as that may, I think we really, this is taking it even to a higher systemic level at the state legislature. We have to reform the school funding model. It's out of date. So we can shuffle the money all around, and we're still not going to get what we need, because we need to think about what is the best practices in a school and kind of back into the budget. For example, and this is just a real elemental part, if we think that lowering class size is really important, and then you decide on, based on research, what is a good class size, then you figure out how many teachers are you going to need, and you keep backing into your system. And I know that the state has, its budgeting department has done a lot of that work, and we need to really get our education funding reform done here in South Carolina. The other thing is, there was a conference not too long ago, the Good Jobs First, and it was highlighted that the tax abatements that we're giving to corporations for coming to, be in our state are actually hurting our schools. And there's a lot of discussion that, tax abatements are good for encouragement and incentives, but we shouldn't be taking out the part that supports our schools, because these businesses that want to come to our state and local communities want us to have good education systems. And the other research that I saw here, which was shocking, that affects our Tri-County area, is Dorchester is losing more than $2,000 per pupil. And that affects a lot of our high poverty students that are in one of those Dorchester area communities. Charleston lost 6.9 million and Berkeley lost more than 10 million. So obviously the funding that we have at the state level is not working in our best interest. And no matter how we try to shuffle those dollars around, that you still have to have enough funding to meet the needs of the classroom teacher and the school.
With regret, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A section that are specific to a single district, and I'm going to pass on those. The question about the Coalition for Kids, for the person who wanted to learn more about that organization, you can go to their website and you can read the editorial in the Post and Courier of about 4 or 5 days ago. Elliot, you get 2 minutes for this. Good luck. Act 388. Unfunded liabilities delivered to districts, the failure to raise the per student base cost per student number, all of that falls at the feet of the state legislature. If we're in a crisis, and crises are a great way to get disruptive reform, what are the prospects of getting disruptive reform to the school financing system in this state?
Oh man, this is a Rubik's Cube. I've tried to, twist for years here. I mean, I've heard people describe our system, those inside our state and outside who study it, as, one of the most complicated they've ever seen, John. I do think there's a lot of attention right now to education statewide. I mean, having spent a lot of time in Columbia the last 5 years, I think that people care about this. I think the legislature has really made efforts recently to, pay attention to this and take it on. And a lot of people want it, and they want finance reform. Some people don't want it. Some people see this system set up as the way it's intended for certain students, particularly those of color, to not get an appropriate and high level education. And so they're okay with it. That makes it very difficult. I think that the key for change is, to me, local delegations have that much more power when they can show how they're going to use the money differently, when they can really evidence, if we had this is what we do differently. And this is where we are doing things differently with the dollars we have. This is where we've gotten creative. And that's where I would come back to, this idea of, for us, looking at our results and we do have clusters of schools, we have teachers, we have some people doing remarkable work here in the Tri-County. How can we elevate that in the conversation about funding and why it's important? I don't know if, everyone realizes this, but even, First Steps is now starting to fund districts all around the state for 4K, full-time 4K funding, $7,500 per child in a new way. It used to not do it this way. You had to qualify as a district, as a whole county, to meet certain poverty thresholds. Now, just if the children going into the 4-year-old program meet those thresholds, they can access this money. And so I think there are some good things happening that could be tapped into. But John, I would say, in general, I really feel like the local delegation needs to create power and community and parent voice around what are the things that we really need, what will we do differently with these monies? Because it is a complicated formula. And I do think that, really leaning on the strength of the local story when we're trying to change the funding in our state is so important. That's a story we need to be able to tell up in Columbia.
Good. Well, let's now turn our attention to schools in particular and talk about innovative schools. We have great schools, great public schools in this region. Some are within district control, including magnets and charters and public-private partnerships to which the district has granted a degree of autonomy. And some, like state chartered schools, that lie outside a district's control. Some here, and for that matter across the country, are making great progress in closing opportunity gaps. Others, not so much. Carol, however well an innovative school may be serving kids and reducing disparity, are there some forms of governance that you believe are inconsistent with the purposes of public education? And if so, why?
Okay, as I stated before, I believe in a community schools model for operating our schools, and we're seeing a lot of success with this in the nation and in communities that use it. I saw the community models working on a recent trip to Atlanta in a K-8 high poverty neighborhood school. And that's what I want to advocate for, because I really, personally, I just don't really believe that charters and magnet schools and public-private partnerships are a panacea. There's problems with all of them. Having served on a charter school board, I know that that board is only responsible to the people in that school, not any of the feeder pattern schools. And I get really concerned when we're trying to look at a public-private partnership to get information, and we have to have a FOIA request to get that information. So those to me are troubling aspects of governance. So in a community school model, families and educators work together for decision-making, the governance and advocacy at the school. Those schools have these characteristics. They have a leader who is competent and committed to inclusion. They have a school leadership team for school operations, curriculum, instruction, assessment, and addressing student needs. It's a school that uses positive behavior interventions to help with the discipline in the school. And then they have specific teams that will address grade level and curriculum areas and school climate and just special needs that happen. These schools have school improvement councils that are representative of all the stakeholders in the school, and they assist with the decision-making that's going on. And the PTAs are there to provide support, and community partners are there to support but not operate the schools. So in a community school that's operating, they're making decisions, they're in tune with what the needs are of the students, what the concerns of the teachers are. And so then as a school, if they can ask the district for the support and the funding, usually it's the funding that they need. So all I can say is, as a district and school administrator, I use these collaborative approaches in my work to lead a school and to create systemic and regional change. And the example I want to talk about is that I established a science resource center so that every student in Charleston County in grades K-8 had access to a trained teacher and resources, and Berkeley County did the same. So what were we responding to? There was a national goal that the United States would be first in the nation in math and science. At the state and local level, we had our community interested in educating our students in math and science to help our economy and increase the students' opportunities for better jobs. So as part of that process, we observed that not only students who had teachers who could teach science but spend their grocery money had access to these materials. So to shorten this whole thing, we went through a process engaging the community, looking at researching best practices, and we established, the Berkeley County folks and myself worked together to get a curriculum together and to establish a science resource center that would equitably and equally distribute science materials to all the students. And as such, we earned a $5 million grant that then allowed us to continue the professional development and strengthen that program. What I want to say is that using this collaborative model to govern change, systemic change in the districts, has to be effective because it's 25 years that these science resource centers are operating within our districts, bringing K through 8 teachers and students science materials all throughout the year.
Okay. So the collaborative model in the community school is your preferred approach to
Yes.
innovation here
Yes.
in the region.
Yes, because I believe I believe it's effective and it's sustainable, and it gives focus to, you know, what you're trying to do. And there's buy-in. It's not a top down. It's not a total bottom up method. It's something that's working with all of the entities.
Okay. Speaking of what's working, Rhett, you spoke before about the Duke Endowment's work in the 0 to age 8 space, and I'm reasonably well familiar with it. And the work that's going on in Guilford County in partnership with the with the 3rd through 12th grades. Could you return to the 0 to 8 space and say specifically what's working and most promising that might be brought to the Tri-County area?
I'd be happy to. And actually, I'd rather use an example right here in South Carolina instead of Guilford County, because I think it also introduces a interesting financing model that might be considered with the state of South Carolina. So there's a home visiting programs we think are pretty effective. These are programs where nurses or paraprofessionals go into the home and periodically during pregnancy and then postpartum until the child's 2 years of age, that actually check on the mother and the child and ensure proper development, ensure the mother is equipped and the parents are equipped to raise a child, and helps move the parents toward furthering their education or either employment. So the program specifically I'm talking about is Nurse Family Partnership, which targets first-time low-income mothers, and it sends nurses into these homes. 4 years ago, we entered something called a Pay for Success contract with the state of South Carolina. And essentially what we did is we went to the state of South Carolina and we said, we believe this program, if expanded, and we agreed to serve with private dollars 4,000 first-time low-income mothers across the state of South Carolina. We think this program, if expanded, can get us better outcomes along 3 measures: a reduction in preterm deliveries, a reduction in childhood injuries that result in hospital care, and a reduction in repeat pregnancies that happen within a 2-year period. And we basically said, we've got a model, Nurse Family Partnership, that has randomized control trial data that produces these outcomes. And so we negotiated the % reductions with the state of South Carolina. We put up the private funding to reach 4,000 mothers, and also to set up a randomly assigned comparison group of 2,000 mothers. So we're comparing 4,000 mothers getting it with a group that are not getting the service. And we're trying to measure those outcomes that we and state government agreed to track. The state, meanwhile, put $6 million of Medicaid funding into an escrow. So if we hit those targets, the state of South Carolina is committed to reinvesting that $6 million back into the program to sustain it. In the meantime, if we do hit those targets, and we'll find out this April if we've hit those targets. If we do hit those targets, we're going to go to the state legislature, not as lobbyists, but as purveyors of data, and say, look, by your own data and measurement, we have generated better outcomes for first-time low-income families, and we've saved you money. In fact, according to our preliminary projections, if we even hit 44% of the outcomes, I'm not talking about the thresholds we agreed to, but if we hit 44% of those thresholds, the state of South Carolina made money. So again, our argument is excellence and quality actually have the potential to create savings. Now I get it, while you're trying to do that, you still gotta serve this year's challenges, and there's still people who need to be served. but we've got to start thinking longer term and seeing what we can produce in terms of savings so that we can create create opportunities for people to reach their potential as adults and live into the promise that every child and every family has. And I just think we've got to think differently about how we interface with government. So I wanted to share Nurse Family Partnership and that financing model that we've agreed to.
It's an interesting experiment model. It's really been used in other places with success. It's striking here that despite the overwhelming evidence that investing in early childhood in the 0 to 5 space has enormous payback, particularly for families in need, only half of those who responded to the survey and some 40% of those who identified as Black believe greater investment in this early childhood area is important. And so we have some educating to do here, and we should get to it. Kylon, the insertion of an innovative school into a neighborhood in one form or another tends to get a lot of anxiety raised and attention. What is the best way to engage a neighborhood in the possibility of innovative models being deployed in their school?
So we presuppose when the need for an innovative model to be imposed in a neighborhood school is that something is wrong with the school. And so a critical first step in the innovation process involves making certain that we're solving the right problems, according to whom. And I do subscribe to Carol's, sort of neighborhood or a community school model, not, as a good practice for raising this conversation today. And parents have to be key in that. And part of looking at where innovation originates, we have to begin through research and evidence-based approaches to begin approaching the idea of innovation to at least excite and ignite the sort of inspiration that could potentially create the schools that we desire. I would posit that we need to go from story to problem definition. Instead of coming immediately with the problem or the issue, we need to begin asking individuals to tell the story of what's happening in that school or the school in the community that seems to have been failing, so that we could figure out what the real problem is. The story contains the background information, the nuance, and the context. Knowing the story helps reveal the real motive, normalcy, and what's driving the actions we want to begin to see as the innovation in this particular school. And then we're able to succinctly be able to discern the problem. Data tells one part of the story. So the Charleston Area Justice Ministries certainly through its research metrics found that the majority of students are white, followed by Blacks with a similar number in a small group who are enrolled across all categories in Charleston County schools, just as one example. Although there are 1.3 more white than Black students enrolled in Charleston County School District, there are nearly 6 times more Black students arrested from school than white students. So that may seem to be a problem. And so when we look at that data, we have to then start listening to the story and unravel to try to figure out why are there more Black students arrested based on that ethnic group, and there are more white students in the Charleston County School District as a whole. And so when we begin listening to parents, listening to those students who are affected, and trying to use the data to help us uncover potential innovations that can occur in schools, such as PBIS and restorative justice practices, the problem is not necessarily clear and is often muddy. So then when we look at research, learning from that theory and turning it into action, research and theory should constantly be informing each other. A theory about a specific need for students should drive the search for data to confirm it. Research, rather anecdotal, what is actually happening in our neighborhood schools, or culled from the learning sciences, can prompt a theory for a potential intervention. And so how can we decide what intervention to invent or try, except it be grounded in some sort of anecdotal and or cold science theories. We have to then rely on parents to help to come to the table and become a part of that solution. Innovations will never work if we don't try them. So be it private-public partnerships, charter schools, all of those things have been tried, and there is no silver bullet that fixes schools in particular neighborhoods. We have to take that leap of faith in innovation to act on some of those very novel sort of ideas that emerge from the field. And so when looking at, and I know you asked the question of how can these models be researched and selected, we have to then move toward other fields of evaluating and monitoring and assessing. Frameworks like design-based implementation research provides structures for monitoring the implementation of innovations to constantly learn from and improve our efforts. So instead of waiting until something that is launched and put into place comes to some sort of end, we need to continuously be looking at, examining, monitoring, and assessing that innovation to make certain that it is actually a plan that is able to work. And lastly, we have to recognize that even with innovation, we have to build in at least a quotient for failure, because when you're looking at innovative schools, there is no real, we can skew data any way we wish for it to sort of inform us. And so when we look at the mindset of individuals who are entering spaces of innovation, we have to recognize that we need to be agile, realizing that there may be failure even in the innovation that we are trying to project or trying to adapt in a particular context. So when we have all stakeholders informed, educated, all stakeholders who have provided input, blood, sweat, equity, and human sort of resource capacity based on their investment in those schools, we have to be able to create a framework of continuously monitoring that, learning from those, and improving upon those things in real time, and not waiting until the end of the year or some sort of cycle, within a strategic plan in order then to assess it for accreditation purposes or for continuation purposes. By that time, it may be too late. So we need to have those rich stories informing us so that the identity and the appropriate mix of those problems that we need to solve can then fuel our innovation.
Okay, thank you. I am going to first apologize to those who posed questions that we haven't gotten to, and second to Darrin and Elliot, because I'm going to pass on those questions I was going to ask you, but rather turn to each member of the panel for 1 minute or less closing statement on your part. And Darrin and Elliot, if you want to take a whack at the questions I would have asked in that minute, feel free to do so. We'll do this in reverse order. And so, Carol, in a minute or less, how would you like to close?
I'll try in a minute or less. So what do I think should happen next? Let me summarize some of the points I've been making. I think that we should begin to work on implementing the community schools model with the intent of strengthening our neighborhood schools. I think we need to work with the state to modernize our school funding and tackle the consequences of Act 388. I think we need to strengthen our curriculum, instruction, and professional development at the district level, because those are 3 areas that help get results. And I know that they do get results. We need to keep building our early childhood education because we know that gets results and it's important. We need to work on better discipline programs like PBS and restorative practices, and keep our facilities up to date and in good repair. I think voters should become familiar with the school board candidates. This is a critical election right now. Judge them on their own merits, not the words of commercials or glitzy brochures. School board members who communicate and listen and value equity and equality and focus on the best interests of the students and interact with schools. They visit schools. They know our schools. I think that that will help us get a long way towards having equity and equality in our schools.
Thank you, Carol. Elliot?
Thank you, John. Yeah, I come back to, the fact that enough is enough, and starting with, the urgent need for dramatic change in our local area. That 24%, that 1 in 4 third graders that I cited earlier. I look back at the first year that SC Ready started, 2016, that's 4 years ago. You know what the number was then? 24% for African-American third graders. Same exact number, 1 in 4 for 4 straight years. So nothing's changed. And so we have to do something about that, and acting around a set of core principles and urgently to do something about that is where we start. And I think, this may sound unpopular, but we become enamored with this word innovation, innovation in governance models and innovation in school type, innovation in the form of technology. While we don't I feel like, know exactly what to do in every classroom every day, and then sweat that to perfection and make sure that it is being done, particularly for students who live in poverty and students of color. You can go around to third grade classrooms, instead of them deeply understanding the foundations of learning, they're singing and rhyming. They're not learning how to read. And, I see that time and time again. You can see it all up and down the K-12 spectrum. And so what are we doing to ensure that we are operating based on what we know works for children, and that we are relentless in our pursuit of that? And we're putting the absolute best talent in front of every student in every classroom, and the absolute best leadership in front of, every single school. And I believe if we really double down on those things, which are very hard, that is going to start to really make a difference. And we do it together with families who we activate to have a voice in that change process.
Rhett? Or sorry, Kylon, you're up.
Yeah, I could echo everything that has already been said. I wanted to thank teachers, building level administrators, everyone who works in schools for being on the front line every day, from the bus driver to the cafeteria worker, everyone who works within the school context in order to make education successful for our young people, even in schools that are considered to be failing schools. I'm a product of one of those. And considered to be. I graduated from Burke High School, so it would be labeled a failing school, but I don't consider myself to be a failure. So I continue to say to teachers, to principals, to those who are in education, whether you're in a traditional context, you're in a charter context, you're in a private-public partnership context, continue giving the best that you possibly can every day, recognizing that your students who are like sponges, they absorb that, they grow, and they evolve into the people that we pray and hope that they would be: thoughtful, civic-minded, and individuals who are already prepared globally to compete in this world. And so certainly it happened for me. I was inspired by teachers. If it were not for teachers in schools, I would be a statistic. And so I just continue to just applaud teachers and educators and principals and individuals who have guts enough every day to still go back, even in a coronavirus, a pandemic environment where some districts were only giving you $500 to sign back on as a bonus when you could lose your life. And so continue to be encouraged, continue to be just you know what you're doing. You're called to this. And so I just wanted to say that. Thank you, John. I know that has nothing to do with anything, but I just wanted to at least lift up those, because it's tough, it's hard, and we see what you're doing. And thank you is all I can say.
Rhett?
Thank you, John. Based on what I've said, you won't be surprised to hear that I think we've got to be data-driven. And that means qualitative as well as quantitative. So by qualitative, that could be stories, it could be surveys. It doesn't all have to be numbers, but we've got to, I think, be committed to trying to assess and understand whether we're making a difference. I heard an expression the other day that said something like, trust in God, everyone else bring data. And I kind of agree with that. I think continuous improvement, which is what we all require in our lives, by the way, we all want to be better tomorrow than we are today, requires that we assess and use data, again, quantitative and qualitative, so we know where we're falling short and where we need to make adjustments and where we've got something right. Because I don't think we can fail, or I don't think we can continue to fail another generation of students, particularly those of color and who hail from historically marginalized communities. I think we have to commit to doing better as a society, and we've got to value education as a strong lever for growth and change and upward mobility.
Darrin, bring us home.
Yeah, and the only thing I can add, and Kylon, thank you for that, because I think teachers, administrators, those who work to me on the front line should really get hazardous duty pay, particularly now. To me, there are really a few things that I think summarizes what we've been talking about. One is, I think we have to have leaders at all levels within our system and communities that have an equity focused or equity centered leadership. I think that's important. I think you can't hide the ball on that, and I think that's fundamental to educating our children. Secondly, I should say CCF is supporting a white paper. You can go on our website and look at this. It's a Schools of Innovation white paper. And within that Schools of Innovation, we've studied Indianapolis, we've studied Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Elliot, I know you have some experience there. But in that white paper, we really are sort of focusing on three things, four things really. One is autonomy. Is that, and what we've heard is if you hire talent as the person in that school building and give them the autonomy, the ability to do the things that they need to get done, then they'll get that done. That's extended school day, that's resources, how they attribute those resources. That autonomy, those autonomies are critically important. The other one is accountabilities. I think when you empower someone like that and then you hold accountable them with the communities they serve and invite the community to be a part of that solution, Reverend Middleton, like you talked about, then that's there. That's in the white paper, which includes data. Data should drive curriculum and everything else, and that's the other thing. It's the authority. That leader should have the authority to do the things they need to do, including hiring teachers, including shaping curriculum, including how they engage with the communities around them. We think that's important. And the fourth element of that white paper that you will see that we are literally advocating for right now is that we need to do this in a very intentional way, that the schools that have been deemed failing schools in South Carolina deserve the kind of attention and the kind of autonomies, the kind of leadership, the kind of authority that will transform them. And so we're thinking about feeder patterns. If you look at how students migrate, whether they're 3-year-old to high school graduate, they live in certain communities, they attend certain schools. And I think we need to wrap our arms around that and stop trying to boil the ocean and get right down to the point where we're focused on those students. That's not to the exclusion of everyone else, but that's just saying we identify that not only do we need equity, but we need to focus in this particular area on racial equity, where the burdens and the benefits are not skewed by race, and they're not penalized because Black, brown, and low-income students suffer in this state and in this county, in this tri-county, disproportionate to everyone else. And I just think we need to be critically focused and intentional on that and give leaders the opportunity to lead with equity. So I'll leave it there.
Well, it would be a shame to waste a good crisis and not accomplish all of the things that you've suggested. I want to thank the panel for your engagement. It's been an enriching discussion, I think. For those of you looking for information on who's running for your school board, go to the League of Women Voters Vote For on one site. If you've asked a question in our Q&A box and haven't gotten an answer, we'll look at those and get answered as many as we can and post them on the website. Thanks to the Charleston Forum for giving us this opportunity, and apologies for being about 4 or 5 minutes over. Have a good evening.